Committee of the Maryland Higher Education Commission. I am the chair. Chike Agu. I also serve as vice chair of the Maryland Higher Ed Commission. So what we are doing here today is a couple of things. This is actually really, I'd say, the first part of a two-part process. Today, we will be presenting draft completion goals for the state of Maryland for post-2025. We currently have goals around higher education outcomes that will expire in 2025, and we're really trying to plan out what that future is after that. So we're going to be presenting some draft goals here that are going to go through a process and at some point go before the governor and the legislature for really formal adoption. What we're going to do here today is we're going to go to Dr. Dow. Dr. Dow will walk us through those draft goals. From there, we'll hear thoughts and questions from commissioners. And really, there's no vote today. There's no recommendation that's going to come out of this commission meeting today. We will have another this committee meeting today. Excuse me. We will have another Education Policy Committee meeting in early October, preceding the October MHEC meeting, where we'll make some formal recommendations that'll go on to the broader commission for adoption around these goals. So so really today is the inquiry and comment process, and really next meeting will be kind of a formal recommendation making meeting that'll be made for a meeting in October. So Dr. Dow, with that, let me turn it over to you. And actually, let me just, before I go on, Secretary Rise, anything that you wanted to add before we proceeded?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Just wanted to provide some context. As Commissioner Agu mentioned, we started looking at 2013 goal that was set for 2025, that 55% of the Marylanders will have associate degree or higher. 2025 is just around the corner. So we analyzed that data first over the last 1 year. Then we started looking at what's happening in other states, especially the ones that are mentioned nationwide for doing good work in this area: Massachusetts, Colorado, Texas, and others. And we found in that process that HCM strategies and Lumina Foundation have been providing support to those states, and we started looking at what's happening. Last 4 or 5 years, many states had this 2025 kind of goal. But several states started revising their goals about 4 years ago. And they are revising their goals for the same reasons why we are looking at those goals, because demography of our state is changing, economy of our state is changing. So what type of goals focus on equity and economic competitiveness will be needed? And this is aligned with Governor Moore and Lieutenant Governor Miller's vision for the state. Having that, we studied those states, very thankful to resources from Lumina and expertise from HCM strategies. We brought a survey for institutions of higher education and community at large, business and others. And those surveys provided description of what's happening in other states, where is Maryland is with 2025 goal, and what input they would like to give for 2030 goals. We compiled all that, again presented that to HCM, and what we have in front of you today is a final draft from HCM. And this process will move forward because rather quickly, because bill filing deadlines in General Assembly, and the previous bill was from General Assembly, 2025 goal. This one, we want more MHEC's involvement and governor's office involvement. So there's a process. So this is kind of moving in a parallel way. Now I'll give it to Dr. Dow, and she will share a little bit more specifics where we are.
Great, thank you. Well, Secretary Rai, you actually covered it all. The only thing I would add is Commissioner Agu, Commissioner Dukes, we are generally looking for your it's not a vote, but your blessing to move this forward to our segment, to our campuses, to our other community partners like Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, and their constituents, so that we can come back to you at the October meeting with any additional feedback from those specific groups. So we're here to give you an overview, see what you think of it, and then again, get your kind of general okay to move this forward in a more public way. So, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues at HCM to walk us through briefly the document and where we're at and what this looks like. So, Martha, Julie, I turn it over to you if that's okay.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm introducing myself, I believe, for the first time to this subcommittee. So my name is Julia Jinkia, and I am with HCM Strategists. And we've been, it's been our pleasure to work with Emily and Barbara and Secretary Rye in trying to help revise its goals. So without further ado, I'm happy to provide a top line overview. I know you have the material, so I won't sort of dig into the details, but the overall takeaway is that, as Secretary Rye was mentioning, many states across the country, approximately 43 states, have attainment goals. Yet, as the demography of the country is changing quickly and our economies are changing, so many of these states are revising those goals. And even within a small subset of those that are revising the goal, not enough states are actually paying attention to target populations and demographics. And so that's really where we start with this three-pronged goal, talking about what closing attainment gaps would look like by specific populations. And you'll see that we've drawn attention to some gaps that actually exist currently that Maryland's data show us. And primarily, we're looking at gaps by race, ethnicity, gender, but we can all income and age. But we can also look at gaps by geographic location, differences between certificates and other types of awards, as well as other identities that we know are important to Maryland's demography. So individuals that have been impacted by the justice system, for instance. And so we can figure out collectively, I think, which of the populations we really want to zero in on that align with the rest of the state's strategy. Relatedly, the next question is, and this gets to the second prong of which credentials are we actually promoting? And it's not just talking about credentials for credentials' sake. We have seen more attention paid to which credentials would actually be of value and how we are supposed to define that. And different states have different contexts for how they determine what that value looks like. And so we've highlighted some examples. As Secretary Rye mentioned, Texas, for instance, has been doing a lot of the leading work on defining what this value looks like. And they've taken a lot of their next steps based on recommendations from the National Post-Secondary Value Commission, which actually establishes value thresholds. But other states are approaching it differently. And we know that within Maryland, the living wage has really been an important benchmark for existing reports. And so this prong of the goal is really asking Maryland to think about how you all want to define value in your own state context and what type of longitudinal data through MLDS would enable you to continue to analyze that value. And then finally, the third prong of this goal highlights research and innovation. Maryland has a very important role, a very unique role in terms of the universities that are part of your state's research bench. And so here we've looked at some common indicators, particularly decided by the Association of American Universities, which is the membership organization of research universities, that really helps us understand which universities are actually promoting more competitiveness for their local economies through certain indicators like research dollars that are contributing towards those, but also in addition to, faculty awards, different metrics like citations, books, number of post-grad degrees that are conferred. And so that's an initial list of indicators. The one thing that I'll just add there that I've been hearing, that we have been hearing more and more in conversation about, is also the importance of incentivizing research for social or public good. And in particular, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities published a report last year that highlighted Morgan State as an example of a positive partnership between institutions that is promoting leadership development. And as minority serving institutions are going to become more and more important in the landscape of higher education policies and strategy, this could be something where Maryland wants to really lean in to something that they've been noted for. So that's just an additional idea that we can discuss as well. So I will turn it over to Martha in case she wants to add anything to the top level overview, but we're happy to discuss.
Yeah, no, Julie, I think you did a great job walking through what's in the memo you received and kind of the background that led to that outline. As Julie noted, certainly pulling in appropriate context from other states, but obviously being specific to and nuanced to the needs of Maryland. So happy to answer any questions or however the discussion wants to flow from here. Thank you.
Commissioner Agu, I do have a question, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. No, I was actually going to defer to you for a second to see if you have thoughts. I have a number, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, thanks. And Julie and Martha, we met before. I worked with you all with Keith Curry, president of Compton. And what I'm interested in is that, did you look at or see anything that was particularly unique about other states that maybe could not happen in Maryland, because Maryland is unique in its own way? And I'd like to understand some of that. And, we've talked a lot about, the goal and the goal attainment, and what does it mean relative to how the state supports institutions when they're really wanting to dig in and dive in. And do you have any information that would say, here are the kinds of resources that Texas, for instance, put into its institutions? And those resources could be financial, they could be human, they could be changes in policies or rules or regulations that make things easier to reach the goal, even around things like transfer, faculty development, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. So yes, Charlene Dukes, I definitely recognize the name and appreciated your partnership on the Level Up work with Dr. Curry. So I'll start with the kind of, is there anything kind of unique in other states or things that are happening in other states that we don't think, could be reflected in Maryland? I'll say overarching, and then certainly Julie, welcome your way in here, that the nuance always comes in kind of the definitional application, but the kind of three-pronged or at least two-pronged goal of attainment and kind of an increased focus on value, on kind of that production piece, what are the degrees or what are the increased numbers of degrees that we need in high value areas. Very common, increasingly common across states, really where the differences are in what are those actual goals, what are the ways you want to reflect the population specifically within both the attainment and the production goal. So it's really taking that broader framework and applying it to a particular state's context and needs. To the second part of your question, I think absolutely that is what, ideally this goal setting process drives. This isn't just a goal for goal's sake. This is a goal to drive policy, to drive investment, to drive strategy. And yes, we have seen states, particularly Texas, I would say, really orient around using the goal to drive a strategic planning process. And then to align investments, institutional supports, and a variety of other policies around admissions, access, transfer, certainly supports to institutions at a kind of programmatic and faculty development level. So that to me is kind of what comes next. Once you kind of set the goal, then you start to build the plan around it, and do that kind of policy and finance audit to understand where current practices align, perhaps where there's missing practices, or where there needs to be changes and shifts in priority.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Great.
No, Dr. Dukes, do you have another question? I didn't want to cut you off if you did.
No, I think you can go ahead and proceed, and I'll certainly raise my hand if anything comes up.
We have never known you to be shy, so we always appreciate it.
Thank
So
you.
let me zoom out for a second, because I think it's important to also, as a process point, talk about the creation of these goals, and how they connect to the creation of the Maryland Higher Education Plan. So I think it's important to talk about those two things. So right now, if you want to say these goals are the North Star, this is where we're going. The plan, which we are required to create by law, which will go through a similar bit of a review process, is the how we get there. The higher is important to create these goals first, so we know where we're going, so that we know what it is that is going to be required to get there. Our goal is to in 2025, in my view, hopefully closer to before the end of the summer, have a plan. So I think one of the things that people I'm sure are watching this is, okay, we're going to say we're going to hit these goals, but how? And the answer is that's going to be answered within the plan. The plan is super important because in many ways that is the box in which our higher education institutions operate. In the end, when they create their own plans, they have to be in concert with, in alignment with that plan. And also, which we're really trying to stress here, we want this plan to be a guide map, not just for us, but for our partners at the Department of Labor, to how they work with higher education, for our partners in the Department of Commerce, so on and so forth. So just to talk about those two things. And so I have a few more tactical comments, not maybe tactical, but it was specific comments, that some of which I think will be answered by the plan down the road, but some of which I think are important to say now. And so if I go back to goal 1, which I'm going to channel Dr. Serrano, who's not with us now, but on this equity goal. And so I want to make sure I understand what's on this paper. What I hear, and I see it in bold, is Maryland is committed to ending post-secondary attainment gaps. So my question is, so right now you did a very good job of basically in 2022 to 2023 pointing out, for example, white students had an attainment rate of 41.9%, Black students 21.2%, Hispanics 9.4%, I believe Asians was 9.3%. Are we saying in this draft document that now, in the ideal, if we do everything that we're supposed to do, by 2030, all those numbers are going to be the same? Is that what we're saying? I wholly support that, but I want to make sure that's what I'm reading on the paper. I think if the governor were here, he would support that. But I want to make sure I'm reading that correctly. I've seen other states who say we're going to cut the size of the gap by a certain amount. For example, I believe Colorado, has that. But I want to make sure, I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So is that what we're saying? That there are going to be no more gaps going forward by 2030? Or at least that's what we're aiming at.
Commissioner Raghu, you got it right. Colorado is cutting it, but there are places like Massachusetts and others, they're bolder. And given where we are and what I hear at the state level, there is no appetite for having achievement gap.
I personally wholly endorse that. The bit that I've known the governor, I believe if he were here right now, he would say the same. But that's great to know. And I'm sure there are some specifics on how you measure that, so on and so forth. But that is a great thing to clarify and to know. Because that is I think maybe Massachusetts is the only one that I'm aware of. I'm sure there may be some other states who have similar goals, but that would make Maryland the leader that it should be in that regard. So let me just make that one comment. But I just want to say that and say it clearly. On credentials of value, which is goal 2, can you just talk about that 90 to 100,000 student goal annually? Can you talk about how that number was backed out? Is it simply a percentage of population?
Yeah, and one clarification there
Sure.
would also be important with Julie and Martha should give, because credentials of value are defined differently in different states. So
Correct.
we don't want you to look at Texas as saying they will produce 550,000 credentials of value. And we are saying we'll produce 90,000. So you shouldn't think that they are the same.
No, I mean Texas is much bigger than
Bigger
we are.
also, what they're calling credentials of value may be
I
different than
see.
what we are calling. So I don't want anyone to think that we are less ambitious.
Yes, I will come to what is a credential of value next because I have a particular comment there. Dr. Dukes, do you want to pipe in here?
Well, number one, you asked the question I was going to lead with, what is? The other thing is, how does it tie into where the state plan is relative to where the governor and his team want to go, especially around STEM, technologies, entrepreneurship, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah. So I actually think I can answer. I might be able to answer that one. I think,
Oh, well,
and this is how
thank
I
you.
read. This is how I read the document is that we're going to define credentials of value a couple of ways. One of those ways is going to be in alignment with these priority sectors that the Department of Commerce, the governor, is going to identify. There's some. If you go to the Department of Commerce site now, they have, I think it's 10 sectors: aerospace, logistics. I can name. If I looked, I can name the other 8. I think. And I think your mind goes where my mind goes, Commissioner Dukes. We don't want to be creating additional sectors. In the end, this has to be in concert with what the governor's office and the Department of Commerce and our at the Department of Labor are already looking at. But I would say, and this is where some of my question goes, that's not the only criteria for credential of value. But let me stop there, and I'm seeing some nods, but tell me if I have that right.
So what Department of Labor has and what Department of Commerce has is necessary, but it may not be sufficient because if you look at that, things like teaching, credentials that are strategically important for the state that need to be there, and credentials that are meaningful for students or citizens who are achieving those credentials. How do we define whether it's meaningful or not? CNA and others, they're perfect debate on that, right? So we need to think about that. Credentials that put the students in in-demand careers that leads to living wages, right? So there is some explanation there that we need to provide. I will let Julie and Martha add more to that, and certainly, those will be credentials of value for us.
Yeah, and if you could answer that first, and then get back to the exact number of credentials per year, just how that was backed out. That would also be helpful for me.
Sure. Just to answer that question on how the production goal was actually derived. It's basic trend analysis going back, to the data we had back in 2014 and looking at the number of degrees and awards, back 9 years, back 5 years, and then thinking through what is a reasonable but also ambitious trajectory look like for the next few years. And so that's why there's that range of 90 to 100,000. But to your point, we didn't break down the trend analysis according to any specific industries or needs. So that could be an additional lens of analysis.
Mr. Schmertz, quick question. I should know this number off the top of my head. How many folks, what's our current actual raw number of completers per year in Maryland?
Boy, I need to look that up myself. Give me a moment.
Even like ballpark, even ballpark is helpful.
Are we talking, I'm sorry, all completers, degree and non-credit?
Yes.
I have not had to sum them. Hold on.
This is just helpful for me to put this in context.
Yeah. Hold on. Bringing up the dashboard. Degrees and credit-bearing certificates. Well, I'm actually think I produced that data for for Martha and Julie not too long ago. We produced last year 82,000 awards amongst the community colleges, public 4 years, and state-aided independent institutions, and then another. What did the brief say? 20-ish, 15,000 non-credit at the community colleges in workforce areas.
So almost 100,000 actually.
Shy of that, yes. And those are awards, so they're not unique humans, they're awards.
Got it. That's super helpful for me. So let me. I'm repeating what I'm reading here just to make sure that I understand it. So in terms of aligning credentials of economic value, we're going to be looking at these priority sectors that our friends. I imagine it'll be aligned with the workforce readiness. I'm almost we can forget what the exact assessment's called that we're going to produce in January. I imagine it's going to be very aligned to that. That's one vertical. Another vertical is living wage, which I totally support. And that's frankly where some in-demand professions don't quite shake out. CNA sadly looks like one of those. One question I have, and this may be something that we put in the plan. I'm channeling Commissioner Tabor-Stalen. The ROI calculation. So you have states like Texas who have looked at, okay, look, for every, and actually Commissioner Serrano, if he were here, for the amount of money that this student is going to put forward, how much are they going to get back? And I don't quite see that reflected here, at least as far as how we're going to define that. Talk about that for me.
So let me take that initially, then I'll ask Julie and Martha to. Yeah, you are absolutely right. When you say credentials of value, Texas says that students will attain these credentials with no or very little debt. And we have not added that, but certainly is worth our conversation here.
A comment that I might make is, I think we're going to need to reflect that in some way, shape, or form. We can say little or no debt. I know that Pennsylvania is looking at this. Some of the counterparts there. I know we can think about ROI, but I know obviously one thing we're going to have to think about is how do we reflect some metric around that. I know it makes institutions uncomfortable because it has cost implications. I get that, but it's hard in this environment to not address that in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it is ROI, maybe it is something like that. And I also do think, to the extent that for Commissioner Duke's question, as we think about resources, is this a place where we can say, hey, we need X amount of support so students can get through, so on and so forth. But I'm channeling my two commissioners who are not here to say it's hard to tell that we don't have that reflected in some way, shape, or form. Commissioner Dukes, go ahead.
So the other question I had is, did we take into account where there are opportunities for Maryland to think about how and to connect a credential of value? And I always say the value is to whom, because there are credentials of value to the state as it thinks about its own economic development and people empowerment. And then there are credentials that are of value to individual students because this is what is in their hearts and minds to do. And I think about, and you may know this, Commissioner Gu, better than I do, and has the state also discussed in any way with these other agencies how they work towards continuing to increase minimum wages? You know, I think, and I'm gonna, if I could give an example, and if it appears to be, I don't mean it to sound political, but this whole national debate around childcare, and we've actually talked about this in our meetings, and there are some who say we give our most precious beings to other people to care for while men and women and families work. So how do we think about that? And at the same time, grandpa, grandma, and auntie and uncle can't necessarily step in to watch your children while you go to make a living in order to take care of your family. So I always think credentials of value make sense as we think about where the state wants to go and the kind of skill sets, et cetera, education, et cetera, that we need for people to fill those jobs. At the same time, I think about those people who just have a burning desire to be this, whatever this is, and we don't identify those things as valuable to in the state of Maryland or maybe in any other state. So for me, it's how do those two things juxtapose against one another? And that's a larger question. I don't think it's a question to be answered today, but I think it's a larger question to consider. The last thing is that Maryland is predominantly an importer state. So how do we think about those things as well as we think about the state plan, the numbers that we want to get to in terms of degree attainment, and then, you know, what's available to us as we think about the fact that Maryland should slowly but surely turn away from being an importer state to maybe an exporter state. I don't know, but you get the sort of drift of my ramblings here.
So no, so this is so first of all, this question I think this is really helpful. The first question you asked, which is how I say this. Credentials of value will not be the only credentials. Credentials of value, as we define it in this narrow process, at least as I see it, will not be the only credentials that we want Maryland to produce. I was just an example. You know, my mom went to our local community college and went to learn to paint. That she enjoyed that. That was something she wanted to do, something that she never got to do when she was raising me and my siblings because we took up all of her time. I think there should always be room and value for that. That's a very trite example, but I think it's a very important one. I think the question that you asked, I think is really interesting, which is there are jobs that aren't that great right now that we in Maryland want to make better because we need them. And how do we make sure that this allows for that? And childcare is an amazing example. I know, and you know the governor even better than I do. I know this is a place where he desperately wants to invest because obviously we know it's a huge economic limiter and cap, particularly for women in our state economy. And how do we make sure that as there are jobs we're trying to make better? And it's probably a place where actually I think labor, even more than commerce, will actually be able to inform us here. I think that's a place where we want to be aligned. So I know there are jobs that we want to create more of, make better. And I think that's just a note that we should have for the future. It's why that workforce readiness assessment is going to move and change every year, as it should. I do think on the credential of value piece, and to be honest, we're probably talking about economic value. And to be honest, we're really probably talking about is hopefully the economic. We're generally speaking out from an economic competitiveness point of view for the person or for the state. That's how I've always read this. But that's how I think I might tackle the question. We're not going to make sure that we push out those things that people do because it's going to make their own lives better for value that only they can articulate, which is totally fine. And that's what we want, pursuit of happiness. But I do think these other places where the jobs aren't quite where we want them to be yet, but we want to get there, I think that's going to be great. Again, just as an example, let's think about teaching. As someone who was a teacher myself, per hour of teaching that I actually did that living wage quite work out? Probably not. But God knows that we need it, and we know that we want to make it better. And so I think that's a place where I think we want to be aligned and want to invest. And so that's now me rambling, but that's how I see it. And Commissioner Rye, Dr. Dow, Secretary, excuse me.
Yeah.
Dr. Dow, tell me if I'm not seeing that correctly.
No, I think first of all, Dr. Duke's suggestions and questions are completely to the point. And Commissioner Raghu, your response is to the point. Let me first address the early childhood issue. Childcare is number one issue for us, and it's very important. And Governor has created a children's cabinet. And they're looking at varieties of issues, including how to make this early childcare teaching jobs more attractive. Salary is certainly necessary, but what other things can be done to make it more attractive? Getting those credentials, what can be done so that people can get those credentials a little more easily than what do get now. And then complete focus on teaching, especially in the shortage areas. I think that's also a focus. Coming up back to the general idea of credentials of value, our economy is growing. It's not that our economy is not growing, it's growing at 3%. Economies like Maryland to grow at 3% as mature economies is not bad. But our expenses are increasing at a much higher rate. In order to balance our budget, our economy will have to increase at the rate of 8% or so, or even more. If you look at our unemployment, it was 1.8% for many months. Right now is around 2.7, something like that.
2.8, yeah.
That means you can't grow economy unless you have homegrown talent. The idea of importing from other states, other states are trying to keep them now. It's a very different dynamics now, right? So it is necessary for us to create homegrown talent. Certainly these credentials that are valuable to the state. That is extremely important to us. Otherwise, we cannot grow our economy and we cannot get out of the hole that we found ourselves now this year, maybe another year or so. So that's important. So that's why we can have population goals, credential attainment goals. Other goals are also important. But these goals that our economy needs badly, they become necessary for us. Julie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Secretary Rai. So Dr. Dukes, I just wanted to dig into your excellent example of childcare, because I think that provides us right now a unique opportunity to look at some data that different states are contending with. So after last year's fiscal cliff, in Virginia, a neighboring, a relatively local state, had an incredible decrease in the stabilization grants that they were getting through childcare funding. And so, they lost more than $500 million. That was actually, the lion's share of that was being used to stabilize wages. And so now we're going to finally, I think, be able to look at some data and see what the effect of losing that investment, that state investment and federal investment, could look like. So some data to help back up our points, but also thinking about how we quantify or even measure the return on investment beyond the individual workers' wages, because there's also data. For instance, there's a report that came out of Vanderbilt last year that was looking at how we could quantify just 1 year of early childhood child care funding in Virginia. And they looked at metrics as how many new moms were actually entering the workforce and what percentage of children were lifted out of poverty. So that doesn't negate the sub wages and the inadequate wages of the childcare workers, but just to add some data points to give it more of a holistic picture, and I think to bring conversations that might not have immediate economic value, to the forefront as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Agu, you're on mute.
No, Google just told me that. Sorry, let's move to goal 3, because I do want to make sure that we keep us on time here. Goal 3, which is around research and innovation. There's nothing here that I would disagree with. I think all these metrics make sense. I would argue that we need to move probably a step beyond that in a couple ways. One, and Commissioner Secretary Rai, you've talked about this. That you've talked a lot about kind of company-sponsored research, which we know has particular impact. I would want to see a goal around that here, whether that's a percentage, a dollar amount, but a goal around kind of company-backed research, co-sponsored. The other thing that I want to see, and this is me channeling Commissioner Williams from his particular perch, which is, if you look at this, a lot of this is, I'd argue, I don't want to say there's a lot of throughput measures, which makes sense. In the end, we care about all this because ideally we want innovations made in Maryland that become companies led by Marylanders, that employ Marylanders and become huge global companies. That's what we want. That's the real goal. If the governor were here, he would articulate that almost exactly. Now, what we know is we do really well at the front end. We know we have led for more than a decade in terms of amount of federal research funding, and a lot of that's driven by folks like Johns Hopkins, by University of Maryland, College Park. But we notice as we get down the value chain, meaning from research to patents to commercialized products, and I'm not articulating the value chain precisely, our rank goes down. We're number 1 in research, but as we get toward the end, meaning actual companies are producing actual value, I remember the stat that I saw from some great analytical work, we were in the 40s, which for a state like Maryland is not where we like to be. And so I would argue we want to create some goals around. If it was me, for example, I want to bring us to, at very least, the middle of the pack in each of those metrics by 2030, as an example. Or I'd love to be in the top quartile by 2030 in terms of going down that entire value chain. Because now and what that does is that begins to incorporate a bunch of these other things, like, for example, a bunch of entrepreneurial incubation capacity. That is the instance where saying, you know what, professor, we're going to give you some extra funding for a year so you can start your business, figure it out. You're not going to be taken off your tenure track, but we're going to let you do that because we believe there's going to be extra value here for the institution, who is going to get a piece, as well as the state revenue, so on and so forth. But my concern with, not concern with, my worry would be with these goals that if we left them, institutions would do more of what they already do. Yes, I want more publications. I want more of this, which is good, but that's not actually gotten us to where we want to go in Maryland. We actually do pretty well here. We need more, but what we really need is, on top of that, we need to make sure that all of that initial research funding and all that actually flows into the creation of companies that have that economic output, exactly as Dr. Rise said, because we have things to pay for in Maryland that we think are really important for the state that we want to have. And the only way we do that is by creating those types of businesses. So I'm happy to, this can be an offline discussion where we articulate that. And again, we have some great analytical work that's been done by some others. But that's the one thing that I would really say here. We've really got to focus on making sure all this actually translates into economic activity, particularly firms that are created by and run by it and being worked in by Marylanders.
Excellent point, and I have made some of those suggestions. We have very strong research economy. If you look at the bottom page, we are talking about R&D expenditures. R&D expenditures are very good, and we want that economy to be here. But how do we create translational research economy here also?
Correct.
That's the point. And that's why we want sponsored research, because we want companies like NVIDIA that went to University of Florida with $70 million research project. We want those companies to come to our universities. If they come to our universities, that's a validation of our research infrastructure, that our research infrastructure is aligned to emerging areas of global and national economy. So we need to kind of think shifting our research infrastructure that way. So sponsored research, how many startups are coming and how many patents are coming, and the market value of those patents. There's a lot of good news in Maryland in these areas. Number one, USM Board of Regents, they already have a subcommittee looking at something very similar. So ideas are aligned. And also, University of Maryland, you all know the quantum computing company IonQ. We visited with them. Lot of offshoots of those companies are coming. How do we use quantum computing to solve a problem of erosion or something? Or how to create smarter batteries using quantum computing? So you will hear some announcements coming up, but we want to first, if we put those as outcomes needed here, we are providing encouragement to something that has already started in Maryland, and Governor and his team has played pretty serious role in all these things within a very short amount of time. But how do we scale it up? Quantum computing is one area, but what about life sciences? AstraZeneca should be coming to our institutions for sponsored research, not try to do everything in-house, right? Because if they're coming, they're using our research infrastructure, they're using our faculty, they're using our students. That means what? They're more integrated in the region. They will never think of leaving, or leaving will become very difficult, right? Because you have so much, you're embedded everywhere, and replicating that in somewhere else could be very difficult. So that's why startups, patents, and market value of those patents and sponsored research. We have to find some way, and we can put some very easy metrics there, something very simple to measure, at least in the beginning. As we get, few years down the line, we can be more sophisticated about it.
I think that's right. And I would either, again, articulate it as an actual number, or and that can be an aggregate number of startups, it can be an aggregate number of market value, meaning I want however many companies, I don't really care how many, I want them to have X amount of $1 billion of GDP value. That's another way to do it. Or you can do a growth metric, meaning year on year, I want a CAGR of 15% or 20% or 25% in terms of startup, higher ed produced startup growth. But I think we do need a metric. I like our patents around startups, around sponsored research, but I think we need to make that clear because all of these are right. All of these are right. But if I were to step into, frankly, any Fortune 1000 company, these are good. But what they're actually what they'll look at is patents. What they'll look at is exactly some of these things that we've talked about. And I think again, just having some metrics that are clear, I think it is really really important here because it gives us something to focus on. And one of my broad recommendations to this, because we think about these goals, is do not create goals that make us comfortable. Do not create goals that simply institutions feel like they can hit. Therefore, sure, they should make us a little uncomfortable. Don't make goals that are impossible. We don't want that. That's not what we're here to do. We want goals that push folks to not just do more of what they're already doing, but say, okay, how do we do this differently? And I would also say, to the extent that we have goals that also force institutions to collaborate more, let me say it like that, not just within segments, but also across segments even, I think that is really, really critical. One other thing that I'll say, and I should have said this going back up to goal 1, really excited around all the demographic categories that we're looking at, make sure that we're equalizing. I would put geography in there. I actually think that is important because the outcomes across our state, a Western Maryland versus Greater Baltimore is very different in ways that, frankly, we in Maryland are not proud of. It just as one example. So if it was even me, if I even had to do, you can do it county by county, but frankly, if you were to do Western Maryland, Greater Baltimore, DC, National Capital Region, and Eastern Shore, even measuring along those metrics, I actually think would be super helpful, and I think hold ourselves accountable. So that's just one metric that I really want to make sure we don't lose, because if we're candid, even a lot of our rural parts of our state are not progressing the way that we would like to. So let me just stop there. Dr. Dukes, go ahead. I've gone on a little too long.
No, you haven't at all. You know how much I respect your opinion and your perspectives, and most importantly for me, your insight. I think the other thing that we should be thinking about, and I said it earlier, is where do the opportunities exist for legislative reviews of some legislative mandates that we have. I will say it because Sanjay has heard it from me as both in his role as provost at Montgomery College and the work that we did in our affinity groups in the Maryland Association of Community Colleges, and now in his role as secretary, that we need to do something about our transfer system. It is antiquated. It does not reflect the kind of state that we want to be and the leader that we want to be, when every institution can make a different decision about whether or not a student's credits will transfer from the community college to a 4-year institution. So I think that the goals also ought to be bold and courageous. So that's where I wanted to weigh in, that if we want to do something different, then we have to see something different. That's where I stand on that. So I appreciate it, Commissioner Argu, because you led me right in that direction.
Dr. Dukes, this is why I was a little bit troubled when we dropped that part of students will get credentials with no or little debt, right? So how do we make, these credentials of value to the state and to the individuals more accessible and more affordable? Unless we solve transfer problem, that doesn't happen. How do you make a community college student? How do we make it easiest possible for a community college student to get a STEM 4-year degree? Now, there are various models in this state. Dr. Dukes knows all of them. Some of them are very controversial in Maryland, right? But we have to do that. We have to solve the transfer problem, and we have to do more. Transfer is just one problem, and we are very optimistic the way we have started. and now, and we're bringing some expertise just in that area within agency in our next hire. But point is very well taken, Dr. Dukes. If transfer problem is not solved, a lot of this will not happen.
So let me push there a second, because the governor knows quite well from his before public service. In my head, I thought about transfer. I was not sure if it made sense to put it in the completion goals or in the higher ed plan. I would put this forward for consideration. Does it make sense? Right now, if I remember correctly, I think 80% of students who go to a community college, something like that, say they want to transfer. That's rough,
Yes.
some figure like that.
Yes.
I believe it's 17%, something like that, actually do.
Correct.
If we even had a goal around decreasing that gap, meaning we have 80 students who want to transfer and we're able to get that number to 30 or 40. And look, some students, they change their minds. 2-year degrees is what happened, or life happened. Hey, I need to take some time away to do X, Y, Z. But we know that's not the case for a lot of students. We know a lot of students meant to do it, and we made it too hard, very candidly. And so I would put forward for consideration having a goal around that. We can go to plan, the how we would put in the higher ed plan.
Right.
And a bunch of the things you've already done around the 30% and all that, I think will be huge steps forward. But having a goal around that to focus the mind, actually, I think may be super helpful here for exactly this affordability concern. And I also think it may help with some of these geographic gaps that we are going to see. The last thing I'll say, this is more of a narrative point, and Julie, you actually kind of, I thought we were about to say, and I'll take your thought a bit further. Dealing with number 1 helps with goal number 2. Meaning, if more students graduate, and we make sure that more of them have, like, it's actually, I would actually argue, goal 2 is not possible without goal 1.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we increase completion among all these populations, we're not going to hit these numbers. We're just not. Also, I would argue, I'm not seeing the survey data, but I'm sure you have some students who, at some point, they just don't finish because they don't see the economic value. I'm doing a civic program for X job. Shoot, it pays $35,000 a year, and I'm going to work 50 hours a week doing something really hard. No, I'm not going to do that. That doesn't make any more sense. I'm not going to throw more good money after bad, even though we actually know you actually should, because you should finish. Because we know that some college and a lot of debt is the worst outcome of all. So I might just say, in the narrative of these goals, I think connecting all of these, I actually think is going to be really important. That I'd argue that goal 2 depends on goal 1, and I would even argue if you think about goal 3, which is, yes, faculty, but in the end, there are going to be students in there who are going to end up driving some of this enterprise. I think that's just going to be a really important narrative point.
So one thing that I had, and I was hoping that this may come up in our conversation today, and we are at 58.4%, and we are saying our goal is 60%. I wanted to see how you all think about that.
I can tell you very clearly, it's not ambitious enough.
Yes.
If it was up to me, and it's probably not up to me, the goal would be 75%. That would be my goal.
It would be good if it comes from you and Dr. Dukes, not 75%, but not something different.
Yeah, I think it should be as close to 70. Realistically, I think it should be as close to 70% as possible. That's me.
Yeah.
Dr. Dukes, I'm sure. How do you feel?
Well, I think it's worth a conversation. There's no question about that, because time is always of the essence, right? And time can be precious when you're thinking about where you are and where you want to go. And we talked about some sort of advisory group, or when we were bringing the presidents together and whatnot. And I think it would make sense to put that on the table as a question for them to ponder.
Yeah, I agree. But 65, again, Dr. Dow and others, I didn't want to put my numbers ahead of what I had in my head, because I want to see if things come out already organically, then I don't have to say that. So, but 65 maybe, because we can be behind Virginia and some of the other states, right? So if we are coming out something, we are already 58.4%, and we say our goal is 60%. Governor
That's not enough of a stretch. That's not
Governor is
enough of
very
a
savvy
stretch.
with numbers. So
Right.
I
Now,
can go to him with this goal.
I have one other question, actually. So when we say credentials of value, hitting these marks, how many credentials of value are given by institutions that MHEC does not oversee? So, for example, certain industry certifications. So when we think about that, that's not, again, I used to work at the Department of Labor. There were actually a ton. I can think of, we could have a debate on, for example, if I were to make it through an apprenticeship program, does that count? Or if I did a CompTIA certification, does that count? I would probably say it does, depending on what the economic outcomes are. But I'm curious how many fit in that bucket that MHEC does not oversee, because I would argue we should be capturing that. But Dr. Dow, and then I saw Commissioner Dukes. I thought your hand went up for some, but Dr. Dow, I'm curious if you have an answer there.
Sure. I don't have an immediate answer in terms of scope, but what I will share is MLDS will be our partner in doing that work.
Mhm.
They have started to collect data on apprenticeships, so we could do a cross check. How many people in Maryland are getting either this college credential or an apprenticeship, or MLDS is also collecting business licenses. So did somebody do a thing that now means they can be an electrician? That means they can, right? And so we can kind of get at this from a couple different angles. They don't have that data immediately, so I don't want to overcommit MLDS to being able to provide that. But it's something they know MHEC is very interested in because it's complementary to all of this work. We know our colleges and universities contribute to those business licenses in some way, shape, or form, if it doesn't mean an actual degree or credential. So it's in the works, it's ongoing. They do have the apprenticeship data. They're working with Department of Labor to get the business license, and then they're now moving, I believe, on to Department of Health for the health licenses. So they will be a partner for us to do that work.
And if I could, I think,
Please.
Dr. Dow, I know that it's been a struggle, maybe too strong a word, but it certainly has not been as opportunistic as we would hope it could have been, even with the departments of continuing education and the kinds of, like you said, licenses and exams that they take to get these certifications, to be able to have them reported to MHEC in a way that is consistent across all community colleges, and you're not trying to pick out the apples from the oranges and the like. So that might be something too that we spend a lot more time on. I think it's better, but from what I understand, it may not be where the department needs it to be in order to respond accurately to questions that we get.
Absolutely, and I can just echo that sentiment. Dr. Schmertz and her team has been working closely with the community colleges to expand that collection, make sure it accurately reflects the students that are being served. And we're working on right now, so we're in the third year of that collection. We have an active dashboard. And Dr. Schmertz, correct me if I'm wrong, we are doing a cross analysis to see of the students in the non-credit world that complete a program of study, do we see them in the credit world? And in what capacity? Are they completing something in the credit world? So more to come on that front, but yes, Dr. Dukes, that has been a project for the past really 5 to 6 years, with 3 years of data that we have. That's pretty good.
So it looks like that everybody is in agreement that 60% needs to change. And maybe Julie and Emily and Martha and Barbara, you can come up with your recommendation, given what other things can be counted. This 58.4% comes from Lumina's, I think, a Stronger Nation report, because we wanted to be consistent. because whatever Lumina is counted, we wanted to stay close. So next day there is a comparison between Virginia and Maryland. We want to be compared that way. But given that, I think bringing another recommendation on 60%, changing that before the commission meeting, I think that's the consensus here.
Absolutely. I think, and just to do some quick, and I'll do this in like 90 seconds. I think if I were to go through some of the other things, I think on the equity goals, the only thing that we might add is just that geographic dimension that I think would make a lot of sense. On credentials of value, we talked a lot about what that is going to mean, having some type of, whether it's ROI, but something, I think, that gets at, again, that kind of student financial burden. If it's an ROI might be the closest thing that gets to that, I think is helpful. And on the research piece, having a goal around that sponsored research, startups, patents, and that was one other dimension that I'm blanking on. I think specifically, I think that would be helpful. And whether that's a growth measure, an absolute number measure, I think that would be really helpful. And then absolutely agree on the goal. And just again, give a process point. The ideal my ideal would be we would have a meeting probably a week-ish before our October commission meeting, so that we can give kind of a final, and I know the chair Motz would like a final recommendation from us on, hey, here's what we saw, so it's a little easier for the rest of the commission. So if we could basically, I imagine you'll do all your additional stakeholder outreach, which we absolutely recommend that you do. Please share our feedback. And I would actually, and the one thing that I might also just ask, really when you talk to the Department of Commerce, is on goal 3. Right now, from when I look at state government, there's not a place where research done in higher ed fits, as far as someone who oversees it, who's keeping tabs on it. TEDCO might be the closest, but even there, not really. I would like their thoughts on how we can collaborate to monitor this over the course of the plan, because I think they're going to see some things that we don't. The opposite's going to be true. We're going to see some things that they don't. So I do think that particular collaboration, which I don't think is usual for MHEC, I think is going to be really important here. So that might be a particular piece of feedback that would be helpful.
I think that's a great point. We will work with them, and when we look at patents and other things, startups, we can look at those signature industries that Commerce has identified, although it's not final yet. I mean, they are waiting for certain approval.
And those are going to move and change. Even as I think about our workforce readiness assessment, that's going to change as it should. But just being able to kind of keep tabs on it all over time, just what that process is going to look like, I think it's really important.
I think that integration will be important, number one. Number two, I think this third goal makes Maryland very unique. If you look at all the goals across the country, they do not have this research innovation goals the way we have it. Texas has a very small part of it. The other thing that I feel good about our work here is, so far, Maryland Higher Education Commission has not driven this work in this state. It has come from Assembly or sometimes from the governor's office, but agency has been quiet. And agency has reacted. If a law is passed, agency reacts to fulfill its obligations. And I think we are changing that, and very thankful to our commissioners for giving us direction to get into that role. Because our job is to provide professional advice to legislature and to the executive branch, not just follow things, right? So I think this is a very, very good day for us.
Julie, before we log off.
I'm sorry, I know we're jumping off, but just one quick question on that research goal. I was curious, we were talking about Massachusetts, and so Massachusetts, I believe, is the only state that actually has civic learning or a concept of citizenship in its learning outcomes goal. And so right now the agency is trying to figure out how would you quantify that as a state goal to this concept of citizenship. And so is the connection of research to civic participation, something that Maryland would be interested in, because I think that that's also a unique landscape that Maryland is a leader in.
I would actually be interested. This actually was where I am. I've taught many things, but not that one. And I'd actually be curious in terms of what some of our stakeholders might say. in terms of how we might tackle that. That's me, but Dr. Dow, I'm curious if you have a thought.
Yeah, so we as a state and our agency, we've been participating in a multi-state collaborative on civic engagement and civic learning. It's been an interesting journey to kind of tag along with them, seeing how other states have dealt with recent DEI reversals and initiatives. Nonetheless, it is something that has been in the air for a number of years, really led by Nancy Shapiro, who is now retired from USM most recently, but she was really leading the charge for the state and continues to do that in kind of a consulting way. Nonetheless, it is, I think I just want to say out loud, it's in the air in Maryland, and this would be an opportune time for us to solidify an expectation around civic engagement, civic learning, whatever that looks like. Other states, what they've done is they've expanded the gen ed requirements. They've added some volunteering requirements to graduation expectations. So there's ways to do it, but it is in the air in Maryland, and there's energy.
Yeah, it's a good point, Julie, very good point. But Commissioner Agu, I'll have you and your colleagues discuss that, because there is, we want to do what we want to do first, right? But there is some politics in this, and we want to get to these goals, and everything gives everyone's stamp and get moving. We are certainly interested. If Commission is interested in doing that, we will take it as your direction from you.
I think the way I might tackle it is, we have a commission meeting next week. But the way I might say it is, I think it might be an interesting question to put forward for some of our stakeholders, whether they be at the college level, so on and so forth, see if there are thoughts. I think we can bring this up at the commission. And I also think the goals and the plan are not the only way to kind of push things across the system. And so the question is, this may be something that sits somewhere else as a priority. So I think those might be how we start. But let's move forward. I thank HCM so much. Dr. Schmertz, thank you for being on with us. Dr. Dow, Secretary Wright, thank you so much. And we'll speak soon.
Commissioner Agu, thank you so much for your guidance. It's very helpful. Very, very helpful.
Thank you.